Okay, so I have a quote here. Sykes' film Death Factory became its distributor's all-time top-grossing title and was also later sequelized. How much money is that? 6 figures? 7 figures?
I will never know the answer to that question because I'm not privy to that type of thing. When we made Death Factory, it was like a work-for-hire situation. And for this distributor who had distributed movies that I directed prior to that and done well with, and he started his own company called Brain Damage Films. And Death Factory was one of their first movies that they paid for. Like they basically, this is what distributors were doing back then. A lot of, especially smaller companies, they were doing well enough that they would produce their own product. They would produce their own films that they could own outright, and then they would, use their distribution, arm to get them into the stores and stuff. So that's what Death Factory was. And I felt like it was going to be a good movie when we made it, but then it turned out to not only turn out pretty well, but it also was very successful. It got into Blockbuster. It was my first movie in Blockbuster. It was, that was really cool to see it. And it got some good reviews too. It was well received, in the horror community. And that was pretty much the end of that. I mean, I keep hearing from people about it, and it was released all over the world too. Death Factory was released in UK, Germany, Poland, Russia, France, everywhere. Pretty much every country you can think of, And they did do a sequel, but I was not involved in the sequel. I don't know how much you want to hear about that, but I can tell you things if you want to hear them. It was actually, I knew it was the best-selling title because that was in a magazine. That quote was in a magazine. I saw an interview with the distributor, and he said, "This Death Factory is our best-selling title." And then a few years after that, I was at a film market in Santa Monica, and they had all these rooms they take over, and I went up to the room. I was kind of doing my rounds at the time, and I went in the room, Brain Damage's room, and I'm talking to the president. And I'm looking around the room, and I had just made a movie called Plaguers, which was a pretty big movie, bigger than anything they've ever done. And they probably weren't thrilled with me because I hadn't given it to them to distribute. But I'm looking around the room, and I see a poster for Death Factory sequel. Death Factory Bloodletting, it was called. And I was like, "Hey, I see you made a sequel to Death Factory, great, that's good to know." And basically what happened with that was, there was a guy over there at the company who was a very power-hungry younger guy who they're going to make that sequel, but he didn't want anybody who was involved with the first one involved with that. Why would you want them, right? They're just the people that made the movie that made you all the money. So they made the movie there. They're in Arizona. They made the movie there with people that were local. They didn't bring anybody from LA onto that. And they never asked me even if I wanted to even contribute to the screenplay. And I had to fight to even get my credit on there as characters based on characters created by, which is a standard credit you see on any sequel or, any Indiana Jones movie or whatever, that's been franchised out. I had to fight for that credit, and they kind of gave it to me, kind of. They gave me like a reduced version of that, if you can imagine that. So, and that one didn't do as well as the first one. It came out, but it was almost like a non-event. So that's the kind of thing that can happen in this business. Sometimes when you make a successful movie, most people would automatically assume that you would be brought onto the sequel, or they would want you on the sequel or something like that. But in that case, it was because of the power dynamics that were going on behind the scenes that neither me nor the producer of the original Death Factory were involved.
And if you hadn't have gone to that film market and been up there making your rounds, you may have never discovered that, right?
Oh, I would have discovered it.
You would have?
Somebody would have told me, some fan or somebody would have told me, or I would have maybe seen the movie for sale somewhere or something like that. But it was weird when it came out because that sequel, they didn't release it themselves, which I thought was weird because they're a distributor. They gave it to somebody else, and then it just didn't go anywhere, which I was like, well, you know what? It's fine with me. I wasn't really in the cheering section for that project. All it did was just prove that I had made another movie that did well enough to sequelize. Camp Blood was one, Death Factory is another one, and you know, now we've got sequel to High 8 also. So, you know, it gives you some kind of makes you feel like you have your a line on something, creatively speaking, to be able to come up with some concepts that are popular enough to, you know, to have people want to sequelize them, and you know, because that doesn't happen with every movie, obviously.
Is that something going forward when you have things put in contracts that if they decide to make the sequel, then that you have to somehow either be credited, involved? Because was that something you didn't think was ever going to happen?
Well, you know, it's funny, when we made Death Factory, I'd already done a sequel to Camp Blood. So obviously I was already in that, you know, I'd already had things sequelized. But, you know, it's one of those things where the contracts back then were such like short form things, and there was always that looming threat of, if you don't want to do this, someone else can do it, you know, and believe me, they didn't mind telling you that, you know. So when I made the movie, but I didn't think there would be a sequel to Death Factory, but then again, I didn't think there'd be a sequel to Camp Blood either. So I didn't have any kind of a clause. Now, future things that we've done since then, especially things that we do through Nightfall, we do have more clauses in those type of agreements, and with whether it's, you know, initial production agreements or it's with distributors, you know, with things like that. In terms of we really go over these contracts and really make sure we look at every single right that we're signing off on, because all of these rights matter, and more now than ever, I would say. And if there's a right that they don't want, well, we'll retain it. And if there's a right that we really think we need to keep, then we'll argue for it and keep it. You know, that's something, frankly, that Josephine is more adept at than me. You know, we both look at the contracts, but she's in favor of protecting me, actually, and trying to get us the best deals and the best agreements and protect ourselves too for like future, you know, sequels or renewals. You know, you have sometimes with, you know, relicensing, this type of stuff. So we're, you know, it's always a learning process. Everybody's always learning, and most filmmakers, they make bad deals and things like that in their first films because they just want to get the movie released, and, you know. Right,
I guess because there's that hunger, and then it is true that there's people that will take your place if you don't.
Oh yeah, and I've had that happen to me. I mean, I've had movies that I had one film for this same producer where I just basically I stepped off of it because I said, you know, it collapsed. I won't get into the details, but it collapsed after I'd done a ton of work on it. And I said to him, you know what, I can't rebuild this whole movie again, like in terms of rescheduling, reproducing almost the whole movie. And then he said, okay, fine. And then he went and just got somebody else to direct it. And, you know, it wasn't anything great. It wasn't anything special. It's not like something, oh, I wish I'd done that because that movie turned out to be a huge hit. And no, not hardly. But that type of thing can happen to you anytime. Even on these tiny films. People think that stuff happens on big studio movies. People look, well, yeah, it does. I mean, it's people lurking around. It happens on low-budget films all the time. You know, in fact, it might even happen more because there are more people that are angling to get up the ladder quicker. Whereas on studio film, like a Paramount film, the grip is probably okay with being a grip. You know, the guy who's doing craft services, he's probably cool with that. He's doing pretty well with that, and he's probably all right with it. He doesn't want to direct the movie, you know, or any movie. Whereas I feel like on these smaller films, that's the downside to the low budget, is everybody's kind of like angling to bump up the ladder. So, you know, I've had, you know, effects people want to direct, and, you know, DP wants to direct. There's always, you know, I'm not saying that's on every set, but it does happen. So, you know, and when it happens to you, when it actually really happens to you, then you really become aware of it, you know.
Yeah, that's the interesting part about the entertainment industry, that's that angling. I like that.
Yeah, they're angling, and I mean, we even had on, I mean, you know, it happens on every film.
Yeah, in a lot of scenarios. And so I think it's just being aware of that. Yeah. And then sort of like, okay, I'm feeling that there's an angling, but I'm not sure what it is. And then just being ready to be protective.
Yeah, but that was one of those situations you mentioned earlier. Did I speak up? Did I say what I thought? Oh, yeah, I did. Because that was toward the end of my working relationship with that guy. And I did tell him, in no uncertain terms, I'm not rescheduling this entire film and bringing all these people and everything on, you know, because they have schedules too, believe it or not. Everybody has schedules, and I was not going to redo the whole film just because one person didn't show up, and then the whole thing started falling like a house of cards. Sometimes these movies are very fragile things, and they're fragile for us. I mean, it's always scary, you know, shooting, especially on lower budget things. It's always scary there's always a little bit of terror involved because everything needs to come together right then and there for it to really work. So there's always a lot of stress. I don't care how many movies you made, you know, the day before, the night before. You don't get a lot of sleep.
Yeah, that's true. And then you have to be up so early, and then you're like a mess for that one day. And then
I mean, we were like the last thing, like on High Death, we shot at Bronson Caves, and you know that's all outdoors. Obviously, the whole day we're going to be outdoors, and if you have weather issues, that's it. You're not going to shoot. And we had everything prepped. So the night before, literally at like 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning, we started hearing rain. There was like unforecast rain coming down. And it was like 3 a.m., 4 a.m. I'm like, this day is screwed. But luckily, by the time we actually got out there, which was pretty early in the morning, still probably 6 or 7 a.m., it had stopped raining and it was starting to dry off a little bit. But you know, those type of things can drive you nuts. I mean, when you shoot outdoors, weather is like, sometimes you can save a lot of money by shooting outdoors, but the downside is if you have inclement weather or other noise issues or things, it can really bite you, you know.